on today's show.
I mean, one big thing for me is, Eric, when are you thinking of publishing this?
Probably will be I think it'll be in like probably late June.
Great. So this is my big secret, Eric.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about my big secret because it will no longer be needed.
Good. Okay, great.
So this is the good stuff. This is the family jewels.
Yes.
I realized early on that like the big thing with selling books is just asking people one-on-one. So I just ask people. I just, if people, like if I post something on LinkedIn and it, about the book and there's a link to the book, no one buys it. Maybe 500 people like it. But if I send a message to those 500 people, probably 100 of them buy the book.
Wow. Interesting. Makes sense though.
Yeah. And so I just found that like a one-on-one direct ask is dramatically the most effective thing. And I haven't seen other authors do that.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Creator Institute podcast. Your host, Koester.
On today's show, we get to hang out with Allen Gannett literally 2 weeks before he is launching his book, and it's a fun conversation. We get to hear a little bit about how he thinks about his book, largely from a standpoint of marketing it. And what I love about this conversation is going to teach us how to think about the fact that 99% of the people that Allen is planning to influence with his book will never actually read it. It's a great conversation. I've known Allen for a while. He's an awesome, dynamic young founder of a company called TrackMaven, raised tons and tons of money. And this book is totally taking off. So great stuff. I'm super excited to hang out with Allen. I think you're going to love it. And Allen Gannett, ladies and gentlemen. Allen!
Hey,
gosh,
dude.
this is great to be able to hang out.
How are you?
So exciting. And I'm doing wonderful. And although, like I said, I have to give you a little bit of a hard time. I thought I was going to get a hug before we start our podcast, but the fact that this guy is running a business and launching a book makes it difficult to schlep himself all the way over to Georgetown. So we are doing this virtually, and I'm getting a virtual hug instead of a live one.
You're getting like 5 virtual hugs.
So many virtual hugs. It's the best thing ever. So I guess, we were just talking about this before, but, tell me a little bit about what it's been like you're not, it's not like you have a normal job. You're a startup founder and a heavy duty one at that. And you've decided to launch a book. It's a no kidding around like book. How's it been to sort of balance it all? Have you sort of found yourself a little crazy? Yeah,
it's been interesting. I mean, I've been working on the book for 3 years, so it's sort of been a slow roll. For most of the book writing process, it actually wasn't too crazy because basically I carved out, Sundays and then a couple evenings during the week, and it was sort of my pet project. And basically for 2 years, I wasn't a very good friend. Like I was just like less social. I was that friend who on a Saturday would be like, it's 11, I'm going to bed because Sunday morning is my best writing hours. And so I had to become very routine, and sort of it's interesting once the writing was done, I'm like, wow, like people stay up on Saturdays. Like this is crazy. And then right now, like literally right now, just for the sort of few weeks around the actual book launch, it's also insane because I have, running the company and then also promoting the book. And so basically I think people, woe is me, right? Life is great, but it is like a lot of literal hours just because both things still exist. One doesn't shrink because the other one exists. So
these are not even first world problems. These are like 0th world problems, but
your life is great.
Right. You have more, Maven, your lovely little puppy, not a puppy anymore, but lovely little puppy has to have more dog walking from other people than you. So yes. I get it.
Yeah. I don't think if I was a single guy with no kids, I could do this. I could barely handle having a dog and doing all this right now.
Yeah. It's, these tiny little humans make all these sorts of things slightly more challenging. So, but it's good. I think it's one of those things too that it's been fun to watch you, and I think it's been neat to sort of see. I think you said it well that this has kind of been a 3-year odyssey, and what I find always interesting when I talk to lots of authors is that in people's heads who've never done this before, they think of like the launch as a moment. Like you have a launch day. What day did your book launch? And I think what's been interesting about you, and again, you and I have known each other for a while. I've known you since one of the first people I met when I moved to DC. So I blame you. And
I think I met you when I was like 19. Yeah, like I think we've known each other for like almost a decade.
That's exactly right. It's
crazy.
I mean, I'm sorry to you've been here for all these formative adventures. But so you've actually, like, the thing that I always think about is the book has been this interesting way to kind of like give people a reason to listen to you about all the stuff you've been doing for a long time. So tell me a little bit about how you've been approaching it, because you're absolutely right. Your book launch has been 3 years of a book launch as much as anything, rather than sort of like, I launched my book on, I don't know, what is it, June 10th that you're launching it, or June 15th or something?
June 12th. It's almost here.
Almost here. Yeah. So tell me how you've thought about it, because it seems different than maybe some people imagine.
Sure. So, so just for context, I run a company called TrackMaven. It's a 6-year-old company. We are a marketing analytics company. So we like to say that we're sort of the science behind iconic brands. So we work with a lot of big consumer brands like the NBA, Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus. And we basically take their marketing data and help them understand, using data, what they should do more of, what they should do less of. So I've always been a big believer in the overlap of sort of left brain, right brain, this idea that you can apply rationality and systems to creativity. And so back in early 2015, I started giving this talk all about creativity and how creativity, when you actually read the history of creativity and the stories of creative geniuses, it's not the story of people just popping out of the womb with all this creative talent. Like, that's actually not the story. The story is not, it's not even just a story of hard work. It's a story of hard, thoughtful work. And that intentionality, I think, is actually really powerful, because it means
Are you saying the Apple's bullshit? The Apple is bullshit, what you're telling me?
It is bullshit.
It's falling. God, you've ruined, Chris. Like, you've told me that this guy in a red suit doesn't exist, Alan. What are you talking about?
Wait, he doesn't exist? Oh my God.
I know.
And so I was giving this talk, and the talk was, people really liked the talk. I wrote some blog articles kind of about this, and it sort of morphed into this thing where I was like, wow, this message is really resonating with marketers, which is my core audience. It morphed into a book proposal. And then, I started realizing as I was forming the book proposal that it's not just marketers who have this sort of misunderstanding around creativity, but it's actually all aspiring creatives. And so it broadened again. And then you actually write the book and research the book. And as you do that, you learn more and your theories develop. And then, the keynote that I give about this topic has developed. And then, you start getting invited to do interviews and panels about the topic. And so it all sort of becomes this like beautiful, messy stew, not even a soup. It's like a stew of stuff.
Jambalaya is what you're saying?
Yeah, jambalaya. And I think, you view this stuff as sort of a long arc, right? So I started doing a lot more social media stuff about a year ago, sort of knowing that the book was coming out now. And so I think a lot of the stuff that's going, the book launch right now, book's going to come out imminently. It's going well from a prep perspective. And a lot of that I think wouldn't have been possible if I had just started from zero, this week, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think you're, and I think you've also, one of the other things that's been enjoyable to watch about your experience as sharing this out there is, I think I would say you're someone who gives away a lot of stuff in a positive way. Like, you're always giving out, insights and pieces of the book and things like that. Like, how have you felt that? Because I think it's one of those things that when it's funny, you're asking someone to buy a $20 book, and it's way harder than selling like a $20,000 a month software package sometimes, right?
Oh, totally.
And so
you'd be surprised. Yeah, people are. It's hard to sell books.
Yeah, it's really a challenging thing. So I guess, how have you felt? So what's been your strategy a little bit to sort of say, I'm giving all this stuff away? Because you do just give a lot of things out there to people to help them in their adventures. How does that formulate your strategy a little bit?
Yeah. I think one of the things I did with the book that's different is the book. I think the typical business book, sort of in my category of books, which is sort of the pop psych category, it tends to be like the first chapter is the big thesis, and then every other chapter is like a story supporting the thesis. Like, that's the sort of classical structure. And I went out and said, I've read tons and tons of business books, and I just think I've gotten bored with that structure. It used to be fun, but I've gotten bored with it. And so what I attempted to do with this book is basically every chapter is basically like a mini book. Like, there's learnings, there's stories, there's anecdotes, there's science. Every chapter in of itself could basically be a self-contained little tiny 20-page book. And the result is that it's just a lot more sort of information packed, than your typical pop psych book. And so as a result, giving stuff away, it's like, well, there's a ton in the book, right? So it's like, if I give away, a bunch of points, like I might be giving away 5% of the book versus I think for a lot of business books, they usually have one core thesis they just support over and over. And then, so if you give away the main thesis, you're kind of giving away the book. You can just read the summary at that point. And so that's been how I think about it, is just like I try and be pretty information dense. And it's interesting. I mean, kind of to what you're saying before, and in terms of sort of the platform stuff, it's been really cool to see like the book. A bunch of our customers at TrackMaven have gotten really excited about it. They've invited me to come speak at like their team and executive leadership retreats, and something that as a business owner we constantly want to do. Like we constantly want to like engage our clients better, and we're constantly sort of bugging them to like let us come on side and do all this stuff. Now so like, they're like, can you please come? And I'm like, yeah, I would love to. I would love to be there. And so that's been the interesting thing, is I think, just by putting sort of things out there that are knowledge and value and educational, people just generally, those are things people want. And now all of a sudden, instead of just being that annoying CEO who's like, can I come meet your CMO? They view as someone you can actually learn from. So it sort of changes the equation in that way.
Yeah. And so, it's funny you say that. One of the things that's interesting, obviously like I help all these sort of young folks, young people launch books. And one of the things that we do a lot of is we really get them active on sharing their story and their insights from the book on social media. And so they're posting a lot. You share an awful lot. And one of the things I get pushback on is like, aren't people going to find me annoying at a certain point? I'm always sharing stuff out there. Are they going to do it? You just, tell me a little bit more about that, because it's been, I would say you're not shy on the social medias. I mean, there's something coming out regularly from you and every day at least, and on every platform. Have you gotten that feedback at all? Or what's been how have you looked at that as that thing?
So I think I'm lucky in that obviously I run a social media analytics company. And so like social media marketing is kind of a prerequisite for running a social media analytics company.
Turns out.
And so I think generally my audience is sort of more, they generally seem to like and enjoy like seeing what my different techniques and tactics are than anything else. But there's definitely people who have probably found it annoying. But I find that the vast majority is the opposite. The vast majority is, I'd say probably my positive to negative sort of common ratio is literally probably 98-2.
Right.
And, the more common experiences, I'll be at, it's neat. It's like I do a lot of videos on LinkedIn, and like, I go to like a marketing conference, and, I'm doing a session. I've been talking at all these marketing conferences for years, but now when I do a session, it's full. Right. And, people sort of will recognize me in the hallway and, ask about TrackMaven and want to learn more. And there's more of a pull. And so it is really interesting seeing that, obviously being someone who's always supported marketers, just doing more sort of personal marketing. It's been interesting to see that. And it's actually been a really good learning experience. I've learned a lot of things that have turned into some best practice guides for our clients just around how to do certain techniques and how to do certain things. And it's been fun to have a little playground, so to speak, to experiment.
What have been some of the interesting things what's been sort of the cool random connections or reconnections that have surprised you? Have you had anyone from like preschool who reconnected with you? You're like, oh gosh, like I haven't talked to you in years.
Oh yeah. Oh no, totally. There's totally a lot, and love any of you if you're listening, but like a lot of random high school acquaintances, like all that pops up. Like, the person who was my boss when I was an intern at 16, and like all that sort of stuff definitely pops up. And it's also been amazing, just like the opportunities that have popped up. Like, you'll get these emails from people who are like, hey, can you come speak this? I won't say the company name, but it's like a huge financial services company. They're like, hey, can you come speak to our entire marketing executive team? And I was like, yeah, I can. Like, I would definitely love to do that. And it's just like, you get these random emails and you're like, oh, sure. Right. And so that's just been really cool, is like having that serendipity. I've also actually made a bunch of new friends just because you start seeing like who else is doing interesting stuff in the sort of personal branding space. And, obviously you have shared interests around audience building, all this stuff. And so it's been cool. Just, I travel a lot for work. I'm constantly meeting customers and prospects. And so it's been cool to have some new friends in different cities. And it's been a really enriching experience. I mean, the one thing I think that scares people about it, that I think is a false premise, is they're like, well, like, I don't want to have my whole life be public. And I think the thing they forget is like, it's still marketing. Like I can show whatever part of my life I want to. Like there's tons of parts of my life I don't show online, and I don't, I don't let people into. And that's a choice, right? If I wanted to, there's more stuff. There's, I'm not saying I have secrets, but there's like, there's multiple dimensions. There's multiple dimensions of any person. And so I think people forget that they have control over what dimensions they share and what they keep to themselves.
And the other thing that I think is really an interesting piece of this is you share a lot of how the book is being made, how the book is being marketed. And so sometimes there's this sense to say, I'm going to say nothing about the book itself. And then on launch day, I'm going to have this massive launch. And I think what we learned a lot with our student authors is we tell them, hey, you need to be, our authors, you need to start telling these stories much, much earlier because people want to feel a part of the process. How did that come together for you and why have you seen that be successful?
Yeah. So I think about a lot about narratives when it comes to marketing and how you want to create stories and drama and suspense and emotion. And usually these emotions already exist. It's just whether or not you share them. And so, for example, it's always really exciting as an author when you get the first copy of your book.
That's right.
Or you get your first
your cover directions.
PR placement. Yeah, you get your cover, right? And so like when I got my cover, I shared it online. And it did really well. It sold a bunch of books and it got people excited and emotionally involved. And other authors would just sort of text it to their friends, right? And one of the things I talk about with my clients is that, you can decide like what are moments. Like you can, there's plenty of things in your life that you typically undersell or underappreciate how other people would enjoy them or like enjoy being part of them. And one thing that I had to internalize that I think, a lot of other authors sort of maybe struggle with is that you have to internalize that this stuff that you're living with, other people are super curious about. Like most people don't write books. So like they want to know what the process is like. They're super interested. Like I did a bunch of Instagram videos from when I recorded my audiobook and people I got tons of responses and a bunch of people were like really excited to order the audiobook because they it's just visually interesting to see like how do you actually physically record an audiobook. And it's a really dark gray room that you spend 20 hours in. So and but that's the kind of stuff you have to recognize that a lot of times the things that to you are just part of your day to day are to other people super fascinating. Like I always think about like people like watching the Food Network and like to chefs, it's literally just like I'm just cooking. Right. Yeah, and other people it's like, wow.
Right. That's funny. Yeah. I think what people also sometimes fail to realize, there's a woman, Charlotte, who shared her draft. We shared 3 draft covers. She shared it out for feedback and she was like, I got some negative feedback. I didn't, that's awful. And I was like, again, to your point, that's part of the drama and the narrative and those sorts of stories. And sort of that kind of stuff makes for the story even better when you can tell, let me tell you a crazy story about my cover, right? That kind of stuff is what people want to know and hear.
100%. And, for me, it's a great example where the cover was this like multi-pronged process. And I ended up hiring this guy, Rodrigo Corral, who's known, at least the New York Times calls him like the world's most famous cover designer. And he's like incredibly amazing. And him and I sort of clicked and bonded. And I did a video interview with him and I posted that on LinkedIn and that did really well. And so there's like a whole, giving people sort of the texture and the narrative behind sort of what's going on is a really, really low cost, highly effective way to create content because it's just your life. It's just what's going on around you. It's just a matter of hitting record.
Right. So tell me a little bit I want to hear the story a little bit behind this crazy sensation of Allen Asks. Cause as you said, right, this sort of thing like happened in this kind of, you're talking about, I needed to start to develop some audience, some new content. And, I remember, I don't know, what was about like 8-9 months ago, you started like posting these little things. I was like, oh, these are nice. And it was, they're getting a few people to watch them, I remember. And suddenly now it's like become this thing where I remember you posted something about who should go on my next Allen Asks and like, it blew up. So how did this thing come to be? And sort of tell me the story of this random little thing that you did that maybe to help this book thing. And now it's
sure. So yeah, it is definitely funny. So yeah, for context, for anyone who's listening, so basically I do this video series on LinkedIn twice a week. It's called Allen Asks, and I interview CEOs one leadership question. It's 90 seconds long. I shoot it on my iPhone. It's super lo-fi. The only sort of quote unquote production is captions that an intern puts together. So literally I shoot it on my iPhone, upload to Dropbox, and I'm done. So it's very, very low effort. And basically it's just I'm interviewing people I run into in my life. So like if I'm at a conference and I'm in the speakers like waiting area, I'll like bug someone. I'm like, we're going to do a video. And they're like, okay. Or I'm like getting lunch with someone. I'll be like, we're doing a video. Like I just did that at lunch today, actually. With, it's a really cool, it's the president of Politico, and she's awesome.
Oh, cool.
So it'll be up before this podcast is out, so you can go find it. But it's like, it was really fun. And I was just like, we're going to do a video. And she was like, okay. And so basically what happened was, for the book, two things. One, for the book, a lot about the book is about timing, and how in a lot of mediums, the important thing is to create things that are a blend of the familiar and the novel. And I talk a lot in the book about why, but there's a lot of interesting studies around consumer taste and preference, and how the familiar and the novel, that blend is where people become really interested in ideas. And so that's one thing. And so I had this in the back of my head. And the other thing was at TrackMaven, we have all this marketing data, and we started seeing that LinkedIn was starting to outperform Twitter in terms of engagement. And we were like, whoa, this is interesting. And so I had been experimenting with LinkedIn, and I was getting like crazy results. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And so LinkedIn launched this is a really silly story, Eric. I don't know if I should tell this. LinkedIn launched a video beta. And sort of I knew that, okay, like being early to a platform is important.
Sure.
A lot of the things that I saw working on Facebook really well would probably work on LinkedIn. Again, this sort of idea of like familiarity and novelty. And so my whole idea was like, okay, I need to get in the beta. And I was like obsessing over this because I'm like a dork.
Knowing you would obsess on something? No, come on now.
And so I was obsessing over this, and I had a dream that this is literally, I had a dream.
I'm just putting music underneath this. I had a dream. It feels like that's the right point right now.
I had a dream about that I was on a rooftop bar of a hotel, and for some reason I ran into Jeff Bezos, and Jeff Bezos for some reason owned LinkedIn. I think my brain, I messed up Jeff Weiner and Jeff Bezos basically.
Yeah.
And I went up to Jeff Bezos, who for some reason owned LinkedIn, and I was like, you have to give me video access. And he was like, okay. And he gave it to me like on his iPhone. And I was like, so literally the next morning I was like, I can't believe I literally had a dream about this. And two, why was it Jeff Bezos? And so then I was like, I should post this on LinkedIn because I know Jeff Weiner like looks at a lot of posts. At least
he's active.
He did, yeah. And so I posted it, and I edited it. So I changed it from Jeff Bezos to Jeff Weiner because that part was a little too confusing. And so I was like, I literally wrote that, hey, I had this dream last night that I met Jeff Weiner at a rooftop bar, and he gave me LinkedIn video access. I don't know what this means, but I think it means I'm like a giant dork, period. And so I post this, and like 11 hours later, Jeff Weiner posts on it, well, I think it means you can see the future, ... you now have access. And I was like,
yes!
And so that post blew up. That post got 1 million views after Jeff Weiner did it.
Really?
And then I posted a video on LinkedIn the next day. Then I LinkedIn video, just sort of recapping the story, and that got 120,000 views. And then I was sort of off to the races. And then I sort of had in my head that if I had access, I would do short form video because I knew that it was working well on Facebook, and I knew it was something that I could do and I would enjoy. And so I just started doing it, and I have a back catalog, so it's really low effort. And I think now I've gotten over 1 million views total on all the videos.
Wow, that's
the
amazing.
average video gets about 30 to 40,000 views. And it's really cool. I mean, it's been neat because it's 1.5 minutes of unproduced video. And, people like, I get emails now from like PR people like, hey, can my client get on? I'm like, I don't think you get it. This is like what I do after lunch.
Right,
like, I'm like, hey, this is not a thing.
Yep. Yeah. What was one of the ones? There's a couple of them that I thought were intriguing. I thought Kobe Bryant, getting Kobe Bryant on that one was like the dude's nickname is the Black Mamba, and so you come up to him like you're sort of a funny, jolly guy, and like you come up to the Black Mamba and say, hey, I want to do a video with you. How does that play out with that dude?
Okay, so I interviewed Kobe Bryant. It was the shortest video I've ever done. He gave me a 3-word answer. That's fine. The internet loved it. It got like 250,000 views. He was at a conference that I was at. He was a speaker, and I just went up to him and I was like, And by the way, I don't know anything about sports ball, so I'm like kind of clueless. So I don't tend to get starstruck. I especially don't get starstruck.
Sports ball? You call it sports ball?
All sports and sports ball. And so I just went up to him and I was like, hey, I do these 90-second leadership videos on LinkedIn. Could we do one? And he looked at me with sort of a squint and he was like, sure. And I was like, great. And so we just did it. It was wonderful. The only person who's ever turned me down, speaking of Jeff Bezos, is Jeff Bezos very, very kindly and politely turned me down, which I was like, that's fine. World's richest man, probably aiming too high.
Yeah. I would say the fact you got Kobe Bryant to me is a bigger get than, I'm into the sports ball. So for me,
I don't even know.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even know his nickname until I posted the video. I was like, why do they keep talking about like the man? I was like, and then people kept saying goat. I was like, what's a goat? Like I was just very confused.
Yeah, this didn't end well for you, does it at all? What about the other one that I enjoyed was Mark Cuban, and Mark Cuban looked like he kept like trying to like get away while you were like you were doing your video.
Yeah, he was super nice. Basically, that was at a conference and the conference organizer was like, hey, can you record videos with the speakers? And I was like, who are the speakers? And they're like, Mark Cuban. And I was like, yeah, I can record a video with Mark Cuban. Sure. And so they organized it. And it was just, I literally went into a hallway and we did it. And he was super nice and laid back and, made me laugh a couple times, told me some jokes. So yeah, he was super chill. Not obnoxious at all, actually.
So that's amazing. And I guess, do you have any, as you think about that, it was an experiment, right? Like you sort of were running an experiment in this one. How many times, that one happened to work out like a crazy man. How many of these other random experiments sort of in your experience with this book have not worked out so well?
Oh, tons. I mean, the one that I was most surprised by is, and other authors had told me this, but I'm stubborn. And so I was like, I'm going to experiment with it anyway. But pre-order perks do not work. I mean, they just do not. And all these authors told me that. And they're like, basically, unless you're like Gary Vee and you have like this cult of personality, but if the book is about ideas and the ideas are what you're selling, pre-order perks don't work. And so I was like, no, I'm going to try. And no, the pre-order perks were like a terrible failure. That was really bad. Print media so far hasn't gone very well, but podcasts have gone really well. Terrestrial radio. So I'm going to be on a lot of NPR.
Interesting.
Yeah. TV and digital video have been going well. And so that's what's going to, but print is sort of like a hard, because it has sort of a more, there's sort of like this sort of, especially in books, there's sort of like there's more higher bar, I think, in print, just in terms of access and history and reputation to get into. So that's worked really well. Other things that haven't worked are, just generally, one big thing for me is, Eric, when are you thinking of publishing this?
Probably will be I think it'll be in like probably late June.
Great. So this is my big secret, Eric.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about my big secret because it will no longer be needed.
Good. Okay, great.
So this is the good stuff. This is the family jewels.
Yes.
I realized early on that like the big thing with selling books is just asking people one-on-one. So I just ask people. I just, if people, like if I post something on LinkedIn and it, about the book and there's a link to the book, no one buys it. Maybe 500 people like it. But if I send a message to those 500 people, probably 100 of them buy the book.
Wow. Interesting. Makes sense though.
Yeah. And so I just found that like a one-on-one direct ask is dramatically the most effective thing. And I haven't seen other authors do that. And it's like, it's not that hard, right? It's like a copy paste the message. Like, it's not like, this is not mind blowing.
Right.
And it like has a super high effectiveness rate. And so that's the thing that's actually worked the best. That's been my sort of hashtag secret. So now the family jewels.
I know it all now. This feels like I feel really special on this regard. Well, and I will tell you this. Obviously, the authors that we work with, our goal is to get them sort of to be a number one new release in their category and to get out the board. They're not necessarily in the social media marketing world of those ambitions. But what I tell them is like, you will get almost no one you post anything on social media or anything that they won't do it. But one-on-one, the best channels that my authors have found is Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and texting.
100%.
Those are the three things. So I think to your point, if it's the family jewels, then you and I have the same jewels, because
Great.
I think it is.
We've just told everyone though.
And it's probably a sense of life though, right? I think there's this. I think that like any platform, it's sort of lost its these platforms lose their luster where people are like influenced by them to take action. So we just want to be entertained.
Well, and I think the thing to think about with social media is I always think about with digital marketing is that the three sort of stages, and this is the most simplistic model, but the model I like is awareness, engagement, conversion. I think social media is really good for awareness and engagement. I think it's pretty bad for conversion typically. So I think that's where your direct messaging, that's why that's so effective, is because that's actually conversion. So use social media to get people thinking about the book, knowing about the book, getting their awareness up, getting them engaged with the concepts in the book. But ultimately, you're going to have to make the ask. That's what you're going to have to do if you want them to actually click purchase.
Man, that sounded like really, really like smart just right there. Like that's like I felt like wise. Like,
can you call my mom and tell her that? I really know. You're
gonna have to
use
make
the positive validation.
Ask. I feel like we need like some like you know what I was saying, like that low Gladiator movie music. You've seen Gladiator, right? Like that sort of music that comes up like, and then I want to feel like there's like drums hitting and then the ask.
Wait, who's Russell Crowe? You or me?
I'm probably not Russell Crowe. I feel like you're Russell Crowe.
I don't think I'm Russell Crowe. No, you're definitely Russell Crowe.
I feel more like we're Van Wilder or something like that.
We'll do a Twitter poll.
Yeah, it's going to be not going to be me. So last thing, and then I have a little bit of a thing I always like to end on. So the last thing that I want to ask about your book experience. So what do you think you would, if you go back to yourself when you started the book 3 years ago, what's the one thing you would tell yourself, or the couple things you would sort of tell yourself differently about starting that process out? That's probably like, hey, now that I know what I am, you're like 2.5 weeks at this point, or when it comes out, your books come out. What's the thing you'd tell yourself differently?
This is a good question.
Thank you.
I think things I do differently. I mean, there's a lot. I think on the actual book writing, I think I didn't realize how much rewriting I would do to get it to where I was satisfied with it.
Yep.
And that was a very good, like, fun process, actually, just like making those incremental improvements over and over. But I think, the idea with writing of feedback early and often is just, even that is probably understating. I mean, at the end of the day, I probably have about 15 external readers. In addition to my agent read it. I had my editor, I had copy editor, proofreader. So that's 19 people who are giving me feedback throughout the process. And that probably wasn't even enough. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, you find when you're gathering feedback, ultimately, art and creativity, I think, is all about the relationship with the audience. I don't believe in creativity just for my own sake. I think it's gratuitous. I think it's about the impact you have in the audience. And so since that's the goal, I think getting feedback early and often is literally the whole point, right? Because you literally, if the point of the art, the point of the creation is to inspire an action, inspire an emotion, inspire a thought within the person reading it, consuming it, whatever, then I think getting that feedback is really, 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 really critical. And so, I think the notion of the novelist going off into the woods and, only returning when they type the words at the end is a farce, but it's even more a farce than I realized.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest insight. You shared something that's the biggest insight for me. And so I'm in the, I help all these people create books. And so when I was going through my process, the biggest single thing that I did was get my own coach to help me through that process. Her name's Jillian.
Totally.
And like that thing, I mean,
Jillian.
Plenty of readers and other people involved, but like having that person who helps you, coaches you, makes you better was so important. So, if I tell people all the time, the single most important thing you can do is find a coach in the creation experience, because it's hard. It's like isolating and lonely and like you want to quit. So I totally agree with you on that front. It's awesome.
Totally. And that's one of the things with having like a traditional publisher, like you have an editor who acts as that coach. And I think if you're not using traditional publisher, I think finding someone who can be that person who's like just in the intellectual weeds with you and sort of guiding you, that is just, it's essential.
She came to me at one point, and I have like four main parts. One of the parts she told me, you need to rewrite the whole thing. I was like, what? This is like my 10th time I've rewritten it. No, but she was right. I mean, I'm so glad she did, but it was like, I needed someone who wasn't afraid to punch me in the mouth. And that's what was great.
Well, I mentioned this in the book, but there's this myth of J.K. Rowling as being this person who just like got hit with the idea for Harry Potter and the book popped out of her. The true story is this took her 5 years to write the first book. and she had 15 separate versions of the first chapter. So like,
wow.
So like book writing for even the most successful, most famous, wealthiest authors is still highly, highly, highly iterative. And if you think your first draft sucks, A, it does, and B, it sucks for everybody.
Yeah. I tell people my goal with people to go through this one is to get them to what I tell them is a very mediocre first draft.
Yeah,
because if you can get to a very mediocre first draft, then you can at least make it into a good book, but you can, if you don't, just go for mediocre. It's funny. The funniest thing, Alan, as soon as I told people that, the quality of those mediocre first drafts went up dramatically because people stopped trying to write such a great thing, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So just try and get something out there for sure, which is awesome. And again, I will give you the same data. It's 98% of it comes from direct sales from our authors. So you're that's amazing for you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they it's interesting because what we do is the first thing we do is have them post this, and typically they get like 2 to 4, this first sort of week, 2 to 4 orders, and out of that one, and the rest of it, the next 100 all come from direct sales. Kind of crazy.
That's crazy. That's actually really interesting. Yeah. And that's something that I think a lot of authors just aren't willing to do. But the average new book only sells 2,000 copies. The average mainstream published book only sells 2,000 copies. Like, I don't think people realize how hard it is to sell like even 10,000 books. You know what I mean? It's just like most books don't sell hardly anything.
The average book in general sells less than 200 copies, and that includes all the whole long tail. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy to think. Well, Alan, this has been great. I remember earlier you said you haven't hung out with your friends as much because of all this craziness here, but I will say thank you for hanging out with me. I feel special in this regard, and beers soon. I hope.
I would love that. See you later.
We will do it. Get through the book launch, and congratulations on everything. This has been fun, and hopefully it was not the most the standard old interview you've done before.
Bye.